Tonight, I am proud to announce that by popular demand, we have a very special treat for everyone.
No. Do not play with my soul. Final Fantasy VII, do not play with my heart.
On a foreboding sky.
I'm shaking.
The memory of the star.
It's definitely Final Fantasy.
All burns eternal in our hearts.
Seventh Gate. This. No. That's the playground.
In its wake came an age of silence.
Oh my god.
Yet with each fond remembrance, we knew those encountered were not.
This is like my entire wish of my childhood is to have.
That someday we would see them again.
Oh.
Perhaps it was no more than wishful
That's Midgard.
thinking.
That's Midgard. Please, this is all I want in my life.
But after the long calm, there are now the beginnings of a stir. The reunion at hand.
The reunion?
Joy,
is this Sephiroth talking?
Fear, but let us embrace whatever it brings.
Ah, this is the music.
For they are coming back.
Oh.
At last, the promise has been made.
Remake. Oh my god. My life, my soul is shaking with excitement. So that was my initial reaction to Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I want to talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake in a little bit of depth. So this video may be about 20 minutes long, but I have to say that for me it's the perfect game. It is the game I've been meaning to play my entire life. I was fated or destined to play it. It's the best game I've ever touched in my life, Final Fantasy VII Remake. Final Fantasy VII, the original game, was a big part of my life. I think I've played the game and completed it over 250 times easily. You know, once I finish a game, I just load it straight back up and start playing it from the start again. Because when I was younger, you know, I struggled to make friends in school and stuff, and I was just, you know, lost. And that game, I was found in it. You know, I sucked myself into that world, and I became a part of that world, and I lived in it, and I loved it, and it was just a massive, huge part of my life. It was majorly important for me at a time when I needed that game, and I've played it constantly for my entire life. Now, I was about 10 when the game came out, so for about 2 decades I've been playing that game constantly whenever I can, because Final Fantasy VII Original is just a perfect game as well. You know, at the time it was on the cutting edge of graphics. It might not look like that now, but it was back in the day. It was the first real 3D RPG that kind of made it massively big in the world, and like globally everyone played it, everyone knew it, and it was such a good story and characters that you got emotionally invested. And then it was kind of like the first real game to ever have a massively impactful main character death as well, at least in the RPG scene for me and maybe a lot of other people. And on top of that, it's had, and it always will have, the greatest villain to ever exist in any game ever, and that's Sephiroth. And just everything about Final Fantasy VII, the original game, was amazing. That's why I'm going to do a Let's Play on it on my channel at some point, and also a Let's Play on Final Fantasy VII Remake, because Final Fantasy VII Remake is perfect. There's only 2 very minor complaints I have, and that's a slight little game mechanics thing. When you are like scrambling around holding onto the roof joints as Cloud in the church, and when you do the same thing as Tifa in the Shinra building when you're going across like the lighting rig, that mechanic of like moving and turning was just very awkward. And then when Red 13 joins your party and you have to send him across the wall and he switches the switch, that was just a little bit awkward at times and a little bit finicky. And that's really the only 2 complaints I have, and they're not really complaints. It's just, okay, that's a little bit annoying, but you know, it only lasts like 2 seconds, so whatever. Other than that though, the game was just unbelievable. I fell in love with the remake because not only did they pay homage to the original Final Fantasy VII in a lot of very special, unique ways, it also changed the game completely. Now, there probably will be spoilers in this video, so if you haven't played Final Fantasy VII Remake at all, please, you know, click away, play the game, because it's definitely worth it. Now, the game is unbelievable because, you know, as a child at 10 years old and playing the same game for 20 years, you notice that in the game there's very specific things missing, like very little intricate things missing from the world itself. Like, take for instance right at the start with the train station. On the original Final Fantasy VII, you literally just walked into a door next to the train station and popped out at the top. But in this game, it builds the world around those specific areas. So in this game, you run all the way through the train station and then come out the top. You know, it extends the game, it expands the game, it builds the world. And the way they did it was just perfect, and that goes for all across the entire remake game. You know, there's so much world building and areas that should be in the original game that are added to this game, while still maintaining the very obvious Final Fantasy VII original areas built into that world. You know, character design as well is perfect. All the characters and the voice acting are unbelievable. Some of the best voice acting I've seen in, you know, anime as well as video games. It's unbelievable, the voice acting. They had perfect cast and they had the perfect emotive voices to portray the characters correctly, and the character designs themselves were awesome, like genuinely awesome. And the story also holds true to the original Final Fantasy VII for most of the remake game, except this game introduces like a new element called like the Destiny Fate Ghosts, whatever you want to call them, and they seem to intervene with the game as you're going through remake. Now obviously they weren't there in the original Final Fantasy VII, but also as well, Sephiroth appears in remake in Midgar where he shouldn't be, because this is the way I see it and this is my theory. The original Final Fantasy VII and the start of this remake game are the exact same timeline, and as you're playing it, Sephiroth himself is appearing to you to change the original game's timeline, because he is aware that he loses in that timeline, so he enters the same timeline earlier than he should to kind of manipulate and trick Cloud into fighting against that fated timeline to change it so that obviously Sephiroth doesn't die in the end. And I think that can be proved with the Fate Ghosts, because the Fate Ghosts intervene in ways where they attack you to try and stop you from doing something that wasn't in the original Final Fantasy VII, like going on a side quest, doing a certain specific thing. But also as well, they help you along the way, like when Aeris falls off the church, a ghost saves her because she wasn't meant to die in that place in the original game. So the ghost saves her because the ghost of fate knows that the original timeline, Aerith dies way down the line. So the ghosts are there to try and keep the original timeline on track, which is being changed by Sephiroth showing up earlier than he's supposed to. And when you first see those ghosts is when you first meet Sephiroth. So I genuinely believe Sephiroth somehow knows that he dies in the timeline of Final Fantasy VII, and the Final Fantasy VII Remake is him trying to manipulate and trick Cloud into fighting that destiny and changing the timeline to save himself. And that's what I absolutely love about this remake, because it wasn't just a cut and copy of the original game. And believe me, if it was just a cut and copy of the original game with brand new graphics, I wouldn't care, because it would still be absolutely unbelievable. But the fact that they've changed it means that, you know, it's a brand new game ultimately, and then the next 2 episodes, I believe there's going to be 3 episodes, you know, it could be a very different storyline to what we saw in the original Final Fantasy VII, but also include some classic places like Cosmo Canyon, Gold Saucer, stuff like that. And if they do that, that's going to be incredible. If they choose not to and they choose to build a whole new world, then, you know, I'm up for that as well, because the way they implemented the story in Remake just made it its own unique, interesting game, and I absolutely loved it. Now, in terms of game mechanics and, you know, fighting and stuff like that, I thought it was unbelievable as well. Obviously, the original Final Fantasy VII is a turn-based RPG, so, you know, you get a little bit of time to think about what move you want to do and stuff like that. And then this game is kind of like balls to the wall, slash everything up, but it does take some skill in certain areas and certain bosses and certain fights. You have to really think about what you're doing, and, you know, you have to use all 3 characters evenly to kind of get the best results in your fights. And you know, everyone has different abilities and stuff like that, and it was just such a great mechanical fighting system. It was built so goddamn well. And obviously they took that kind of from the Final Fantasy 15 game. You know, there's a lot of things from Final Fantasy 15 or similar mechanics that you see in Final Fantasy 7 Remake, like the stagger bar and stuff like that. And it was just implemented so well. It just fit Final Fantasy 7's theme so damn well, and it was so impressive and so fun to play from start to finish. Because sometimes when you play games that are like quote unquote hack and slash, you get bored because you're just constantly doing the same things over and over and over again. But in this game, you know, every weapon you got is usable. You know, they all have different stats, all have different abilities, so it's kind of like a different type of RPG than what you had in the original Final Fantasy 7, where you can build, you know, you can build your builds around specific weapons. So at the very start, Cloud starts with a Buster Sword. You could use that through the entire game and never change weapon, never do anything else other than use the Buster Sword if you wish to. But then you have so many other weapons. I think it was like 8 weapons for each character, and you know, each of those weapons have their own special abilities which you have to learn to be able to use while you're using other weapons. And it was just such a amazing, well put together system for leveling up your weapons, because it wasn't something you had to really go out of your way to do. It was kind of passive alongside the story, but it was just so, you know, it was so unique, so interesting to the Final Fantasy 7 game generation, you know, to what it is now in Final Fantasy 7 Remake. I just absolutely loved everything about it. One of the really impressive things about this game was the implementation of side quests, because the side quests in this game weren't just, you know, like fodder to extend the game. Like, they actually had real meaning. It made the worlds more immersive. It made the towns that you were in feel like a real world town where everyone knows each other and everyone's friendly and things like that. Like it felt like it was a real world town that you was in, and you was helping those people and building up trust and relationships with them, which I know sounds very cheesy and very stupid, but it actually just had that impact in this game. They did it so well where it wasn't just in your face, and the side quests you don't even have to do if you don't want to. It's just something you can choose to do. And it was implemented so well, and everything in this game was just implemented so well. One thing I would have liked to see more of was mini games. So you had the darts game, obviously, and then there was the kind of game where you hunt down enemies and then you get like a score when you go back to the town. It tells you how many things you've wiped out and cleared out. But other than that, there wasn't really much else to do in terms of like mini games and stuff. Like, I hope they bring that in the Gold Saucer. And God, please put the Gold Saucer in this game, because it would be absolutely incredible if they did. But I would have liked to see a few more mini games strewn throughout the remake. But there is so much to do anyway in the game that's just like an afterthought. I'd have just loved to, you know, be able to play darts a little bit longer, maybe have pool or something, you know, just literally anything thrown into the game that is just fun to add on and just play and mess around on. One of the things they got really, really right about this game was the mood of the game. Because in the original Final Fantasy 7, you know, when you go through the bombing mission and you blow up the whole reactor, you know, in real life, that reactor would explode and kill thousands of people. It would, you know, knock out power everywhere. It would make people's lives a struggle for a very, very long time, probably years and years, maybe even a decade after blowing up one single reactor. And that wasn't really portrayed in the original Final Fantasy 7. It was kind of just like, oh, here we just blew this up, let's go blow up another one. And in this game, it was very, very well put together to set the mood, where after you blow up the reactor, you feel like there's actual real implications and you should feel guilty about what you've done. And the somber mood and, you know, all the people screaming and struggling and crying in the streets, it was just perfect. You know, it was just I don't have any words for it. It was just wow. It was so perfect the way they put things together. And also they kind of filled out a little bit of story and stuff. Like in the later reactor, you realize that Heidegger actually blew up the reactor himself, because in the original game that wasn't entirely clear. So, you know, they've kind of retconned things and just like expanded the story and made it more realistic to how a world would work rather than the original Final Fantasy 7. And it was just amazing. Like, I absolutely loved every single second of it. And I think the last couple of things I'll talk about is the magic system, the boss fights, and the music, because the music is super important to me in a game like this. Now we'll start off with the magic. Now the original Final Fantasy VII, one of the earliest memories I have was slotting materia into the very first weapons you get. That memory stuck in my head forever. That sound it made, how it felt, you know, and it's a once in a lifetime moment, because once you know it and you know that feeling exists, you never really feel it on that level again. And I think Final Fantasy VII Remake, it didn't really miss the mark with it, but the magic system didn't really have that kind of impact for me as it did in the original Final Fantasy VII. It was very important and very useful, but I just felt like it wasn't as useful as it was in the original Final Fantasy VII, if that makes sense. But they made up for that in this game with awesome combat abilities and, you know, the free flowing fights, and the introduction of like new characters like the guy, the other soldier guy, can't remember his name. You know, they made up for the lack of magic and stuff by adding in extra mechanics in the fights, and, you know, having new things to do in fights and new enemies to fight too. It was just, I feel like magic could have been more important than it was. But it was still very important. Obviously, some fights you specifically need magic, like the Hell House. When you first fight the Hell House, you need all types of materia in to combat his weaknesses as he's changing elements, and that is where it kind of struck that chord for me of that, like, first time I equipped the materia is in very specific fights. But overall, across the board, magic just felt kind of here nor there. You know, you use it because it's there, but it wasn't something that you felt really excited to use. But like I said, everything they put into the battle system kind of made up for the lack of, you know, impactful magic. And I think they found a good balance overall. I personally just would have loved to see a bit more magic destruction. And I suppose with the right setups and the right weapons, you could have a full magic playthrough. But then you could play something like hard mode, where hard mode has no MP restoration items or anything like that. So that makes magic even less important, and you have to use very specific magics in very specific parts. So I just feel like magic kind of missed the mark a little bit, but the whole battle systems in general was just way much better. I can't even speak proper English. It was awesome, let's just put it that way. The summon materia, now in the original Final Fantasy VII, when you first play the game and you go through it, you're using summoning materia all the time for everything. But when you've played it a numerous amounts of times like I have, summoning materia becomes pointless in the game. It's just basically a waste of MP, because, you know, you can put your physical damage up so much, magic does so much damage, that summoning materia just kind of becomes a second thought, and you just kind of level it up to be able to get the master summon material. And just for completionists, some summons have some uses throughout the game, but for the most part they don't. They just take up materia slots, and in this game they implemented it perfectly, which I'm very happy about, because it has that kind of Final Fantasy 15-esque summoning. You know, apart from them being like 500,000 feet tall in Final Fantasy 15, in this game, you know, they come when you need them, when you're struggling, when you're damaged. You know, they come in and they battle with you, but you get to control them, kind of. You don't really get to control them directly, but you can command them to do things. And I think it was absolutely beautifully implemented into the game. It was perfect, and I know I keep saying that, and I'm going to keep saying it because it's true. The game and the implemented mechanics were just perfect. And the last thing I kind of want to talk about is the music in the game. Now, music across the board in any game that I play is massively important, whether that's something relaxing like the Minecraft music, or, you know, just various games that I played with very good music in. The original Final Fantasy VII was the first attachment I made to music in video games being important, so I needed this game to be equally as important. And they kept true to the original Final Fantasy VII music and how it flows through the game, but they obviously improved on it and changed it enough where it was unique to Final Fantasy VII Remake, but still was extremely impactful, extremely important, and extremely honouring the original music. And I just loved the music from start to finish. If I had to say there's one thing about Final Fantasy VII Remake that was absolutely 100% perfect, you know, other things you can make an argument against certain aspects, but the music in this game was perfect. It was just, oh god, it was amazing. Like, in certain areas you have, like, I think they say they have like 3 or 4 tracks made for one area, and what you're doing in that area, the music changes to what you're doing, and it's so seamless and just amazing that it just worked perfectly. It was Oh god, the music is beautiful, and music in Final Fantasy games across the board are absolutely incredible anyway. You know, I don't think there's a single Final Fantasy track across all 16 games now that I would say was a bad track. Like, I listen to Final Fantasy 7 music every single day from the original game because that's how good the music is. And I just want to wrap it up talking about the most important music, or at least two of the most important music pieces in Final Fantasy 7. That's Aerith's theme, which in this game was just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, and the best theme ever for the greatest villain who's ever existed in any game ever, Sephiroth's theme, One Winged Angel. Oh my god, this music just hits different in this game. When you fight Sephiroth towards the end of the game, you know, you go through this kind of like battle with him in different stages, and throughout all of them there's no One Winged Angel at all. It's just, you know, some very, very good hype music while you're having that fight, and you're so focused on the fight because, you know, you're fighting Sephiroth in 3D and his graphics are amazing and he's beating your ass and you've got to beat him, that when the One Winged Angel music drops in, it's God, it gave me goosebumps. It's giving me goosebumps right now. My hairs on my arms are standing up just thinking about how incredible it was when that One Winged Angel music dropped during that fight. Absolutely beautiful. Chef's kiss all around for everyone. Just an amazing game, and I love it, and I'm going to be playing it on my channel at some point in the near future because it means so damn much to me. I have come a long way since that original reaction, but that original reaction still stands to this day, even after I played Final Fantasy VII Remake, because it was a perfect game. Thank you for watching. I've been easynow, and you guys have been awesome.